These survival secrets saved millions of soldiers from certain death during World War II. You have no idea what they had to do to get clean water in the inhuman conditions of war. Snow became poison, ice turned into a deadly trap, and a dirty puddle could be the last hope for salvation. In this hell, ingenious solutions were born, turning frozen mud into the elixir of life. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how a regular tin can and a handful of charcoal could save an entire platoon from agonizing thirst. Ready to learn the secret that changed the lives of millions of soldiers? The most common and fatal mistake made by recruits was eating snow to quench their thirst. The ice crystals burned their throats and stomachs, robbing their bodies of precious heat. Instead of relief, they experienced dehydration and general hypothermia, which could be fatal. Experienced soldiers knew the main rule. Snow should not be eaten, but melted properly. The process began with the selection of suitable snow. Freshly fallen snow from the upper layers, which had not yet absorbed dust and dirt from the ground, was considered the cleanest. A metal pot or helmet served as the ideal container for melting. A small amount of snow was placed at the bottom and put on low heat. The main secret was gradualness. Snow was added as the previous portions melted. If the pot was filled to the brim with snow at once, the lower layers would turn into water, while the upper layers would remain frozen. At the same time, the bottom of the pot could burn through, and the water could boil away. Such a mistake would cost the soldier his only chance of obtaining drinking water. The melted water was always brought to a boil. Even the cleanest-looking snow could contain dangerous bacteria. Boiling for 10 minutes ensured the safety of the resulting liquid. Smart soldiers saved fuel by using their own body heat. They placed small portions of snow in a metal flask and carried it under their overcoats. Body heat slowly but surely turned the snow into water. What do you think? Were the soldiers right to risk exposing themselves for the sake of hot water? Share your thoughts in the comments. What if I told you that not all ice is equally useful? Frozen puddles, ponds, and streams produced ice that appeared clean and transparent. However, dangerous contaminants were often hidden under the ice, which could turn life-giving moisture into a source of disease and poisoning. Experienced soldiers knew how to distinguish the quality of ice by its appearance. Cloudy, bubbly ice with inclusions of dirt was immediately rejected. Preference was given to transparent ice from flowing water bodies, where the water froze in motion. The cleanest ice was considered to be that formed on the surface of fast-flowing streams and rivers. Such ice had a characteristic layered structure and high transparency. It could be used with minimal processing. To clean the ice, soldiers used a simple but effective method of layer-by-layer melting. A piece of ice was placed in a pot and slowly heated. The first portions of melted water were drained off, as they contained the main impurities. The middle part of the iceberg was considered the cleanest. It was this water that was left for drinking. The last remnants of ice, in which heavy impurities could be concentrated, were also discarded. British soldiers used an interesting technique to check the quality of the ice. They placed a piece on the metal surface of a helmet and observed how it melted. Pure ice melted evenly, leaving clear water. If the melting process resulted in sediment, cloudiness, or an unpleasant odor, the ice was considered unsuitable. Soldiers preferred to go without water rather than risk poisoning in conditions where medical care was unavailable. Soviet soldiers often combined ice with snow in a 1-to-1 ratio. This allowed them to obtain a larger volume of water and further dilute any possible contaminants. The mixture was slowly melted, stirring constantly. Soldiers learned to determine the age of ice by its structure. Old ice, which had melted and frozen repeatedly, had characteristic air pockets and was less dense. Such ice was considered less reliable in terms of purity. This experience shows that even in extreme conditions, it is possible to find ways to provide yourself with quality drinking water. The main thing is to know what to look for and not to rush. But what if there is no clean ice, only dirty, murky water? In the next chapter, you will learn how to turn swamp sludge into a life-giving source. Only the most experienced soldiers knew this unique secret. When there was no clean snow or clear ice to be found, they had to work with what they had. Dirty water from potholes, puddles, and swamps was their last hope for survival, but drinking it without treatment meant certain death. Soldiers from all armies quickly mastered the art of making filters from improvised materials. The basis of such a device was any container with a hole in the bottom, a tin can, a helmet, or even a rolled-up burlap bag. The secret to effective filtration was the correct order of the layers. Small stones or gravel were placed at the bottom of the container to trap large particles of dirt and create a drainage layer for the free flow of purified water. The next layer was clean river sand, which could be found even in the most devastated areas. The sand was washed in a separate container until the drained water became relatively clear. The most important component of the filter was charcoal. It was obtained from a fire by allowing the wood to burn completely and then grinding it into large crumbs. Charcoal had the amazing ability to absorb dissolved impurities and unpleasant odors. A clean cloth was placed on top, a piece of gauze from a medical kit, a scrap of shirt, or a handkerchief. This layer trapped the smallest suspended particles and made the water visually clear. Guess how many soldiers died from preventable infections? Getting water is only half the battle. The other half, which is just as important, is making that water safe to drink. Boiling was the only reliable way to kill bacteria and other microorganisms in the field. Soldiers quickly learned the golden rule. Any water from untested sources must be boiled for at least 10 minutes. This time guaranteed the destruction of all known pathogens, including those that cause dysentery and typhoid fever. The boiling process began with the right choice of container. Stainless steel pots and mugs were ideal because they heated quickly and evenly. Aluminum cookware was also suitable, but required more careful handling. The fire for boiling should not be too strong. Violent boiling led to rapid evaporation of water and could damage the cookware. A weak but steady boil was the optimal mode for disinfection. Soviet soldiers used a simple method to determine when the water was ready. They counted the bubbles rising from the bottom of the pot. When the bubbles became large and frequent, it meant that the temperature had reached 100 degrees. In high-altitude areas where atmospheric pressure was lower, the water had to be boiled longer. Experienced mountain riflemen knew that at high altitudes, the boiling time had to be increased to 15 to 20 minutes. Saving fuel was a critical task. Soldiers learned to use the residual heat of the coals to maintain boiling. After the fire had burned actively, the pot of water was placed on slowly smoldering coals. The lid on the pot not only sped up the boiling process, but also saved water. Steam condensed on the inside of the lid and dripped back down, preventing the loss of precious moisture. After boiling, they did not rush to cool the water in the cold. A sharp change in temperature could damage tooth enamel and burn the throat. It was better to let the water cool naturally or add a little snow. British soldiers often added leaves from wild plants, nettles, birch, or oak to boiling water. This not only improved the taste but also enriched the water with nutrients, which was important given the monotonous army diet. Boiling turned questionable liquid into safe drinking water. This simple process saved more soldiers' lives than many of the medicines of the time. Do you think it was worth the risk of lighting a fire to boil water if it could attract the enemy's attention? When it was impossible or too dangerous to build a fire, soldiers relied on chemical methods to purify water. Chlorine and iodine tablets became a real lifesaver for troops operating under strict camouflage conditions. These small white circles were compact, lightweight, and incredibly effective. British and American soldiers received standard sets of tablets for water disinfection. Each tablet was designed to treat 1 liter of liquid. The procedure was simple. The tablet was thrown into a flask of water and shaken thoroughly. The waiting time was 30 minutes. During this time, the chemically active substances killed all bacteria and viruses. The water acquired a characteristic medicinal taste, which many soldiers found disgusting, but it was a small price to pay for safety. Soviet soldiers more often used potassium permanganate crystals, which were always available in medical kits. Several crystals were dissolved in a pot of water until a pale pink solution was obtained. The concentration had to be precise. Too weak a solution would not kill the bacteria. Too strong a solution could cause poisoning. A simple trick helped to determine the correct concentration of potassium permanganate. The water should turn a barely noticeable pink, like a pale sunset. If the solution turned bright pink or red, it was diluted with clean water to the desired concentration. German soldiers used panicide tablets, a chloramine-based drug. 1 tablet disinfected half a liter of water in 20 minutes. Panicide was less effective against some resistant bacteria, but it hardly affected the taste of the water. The Japanese military used iodine solutions of their own production. Iodine was particularly effective against dysentery bacteria, which were a real scourge of tropical theaters of war. However, iodine stained the water yellowish and gave it an unpleasant metallic taste. The main disadvantage of chemical disinfection was the inability to purify cloudy, dirty water. Suspended particles protected bacteria from the effects of chemicals. Therefore, before chemical treatment, the water had to be filtered or settled. Soldiers learned to combine different purification methods. First, the water was filtered through a homemade filter, then treated with chemicals, and, if in doubt, boiled. This triple protection guaranteed absolute safety. Disinfection tablets were so important that they were included in the emergency supplies of pilots and paratroopers. These little helpers could save the life of a downed pilot who found himself behind enemy lines without the ability to start a fire. Chemical water purification became one of the most important achievements in military medicine. It dramatically reduced losses from intestinal infections and gave soldiers the opportunity to obtain safe drinking water in all conditions. Now you will learn about a method that saved thousands of lives. Murky water from craters, broken water pipes, and contaminated sources was a frequent reality during wartime. Soldiers could not afford to refuse such water, but drinking it in its original form was extremely dangerous. The settling method was based on a simple physical principle. Heavy dirt particles settled to the bottom under the force of gravity. All it took was time, patience, and a suitable container. The water was poured into the largest available container, a pot, bucket, or even a helmet. The main condition was that the container had to be stable and not subject to shaking. Any movement would stir up the settled silt back into the water. The settling process could take from several hours to a whole day. Soldiers learned to plan this process in advance, starting to settle the water in the evening so that they would have relatively clean liquid for breakfast in the morning. Natural coagulants helped speed up the clarification process. Soviet soldiers used oak or birch bark, which they chopped up finely and added to the cloudy water. The tannins bound the small particles into larger flakes, which settled more quickly. American Marines in the Pacific Theater used aloe juice to clarify swamp water. The plant was widespread in the tropics, and its juice had the property of binding suspended particles and accelerating their sedimentation. British soldiers in North Africa learned to use alum, a mineral that could be found in some rocks. A small piece of alum was dissolved in turbid water, after which it quickly cleared and became suitable for further processing. Collecting settled water required special care. The upper layers were carefully drained or scooped out without disturbing the sediment at the bottom. To do this, they used an improvised siphon made of a rubber tube or simply tilted the container. The last portions of water, in which most of the dirt was concentrated, were not wasted. They were used for technical needs, washing dishes, laundry, or extinguishing fires. In conditions of scarcity, every drop counted. German mountain riflemen in the Alps combined settling with natural freezing. They left the murky water in the cold until a thin crust of ice formed. The ice was cleaner than the water, and the concentration of dirt in the remaining liquid increased, accelerating further sedimentation. This method required planning and discipline, but it yielded excellent results. It turned undrinkable sludge into relatively clean water, which could then be made completely safe by boiling or chemical treatment. In the next chapter, you will learn how soldiers learned to obtain water even where it seemed to be completely unavailable. Soldiers who found themselves in arid regions or in conditions where there were no surface water sources learned to extract moisture literally from the air. The condensation method was based on a simple physical phenomenon: the conversion of water vapor into droplets of liquid water when cooled. The simplest condenser could be constructed from any metal surface and a piece of cloth. A metal helmet, canteen, or even a bayonet knife served as a cooling surface on which moisture from the warm air settled. This method worked most effectively in the early morning hours, when the difference between the temperature of the air and metal objects was greatest. Soldiers laid out all available metal objects in an open space and waited for dew to appear. A clean cloth, a handkerchief, a piece of shirt, or gauze from a medical kit was used to collect the condensation. The cloth was used to gently dab the moisture droplets, and then the collected water was squeezed into a flask or mug. A more complex design was an improvised distillation unit. Any available water was poured into a pot, even salty or dirty water. A piece of tarpaulin or a raincoat was stretched over the top, creating an inclined surface for the condensate to drain. When heated, the water evaporated and the steam condensed on the cold surface of the tarpaulin. Clean drops flowed into a container placed underneath. This method made it possible to obtain distilled water even from seawater or completely unsuitable liquids. Soldiers of Rommel's African Corps improved this technology by using car radiators as ready-made condensers. Hot air was passed through a radiator cooled by cold water or simply by the night air, producing condensate at the outlet. Soviet scouts in steppe areas learned to collect morning dew using clean cloth spread on the grass before dawn. Overnight, the cloth absorbed a surprising amount of moisture, which was then squeezed into a container. Japanese soldiers on the Pacific Islands used large leaves of tropical plants as natural dew collectors. The leaves were placed at an angle so that the collected moisture would flow into the containers placed underneath. The effectiveness of the method depended on air humidity and temperature differences. In arid climates, it yielded very little water, but in more humid conditions, it allowed up to several glasses of liquid to be collected overnight. The condensed water was practically distilled and did not require additional purification. Its only drawback was a slight metallic taste from contact with metal surfaces, but this was a minor issue compared to the opportunity to obtain clean water. Experienced soldiers knew how to read the signs of nature that indicated the quality of water in a source. This knowledge, passed down from veterans to recruits, helped them avoid poisoning and find the safest sources of water in unfamiliar terrain. The first and most reliable indicator of water quality was animal behavior. If traces of animals, deer, hares, or birds could be seen near a source, it meant that the water was safe to drink. Animals have an instinct that protects them from poison sources. The vegetation around the source also said a lot about the quality of the water. Bright green, lush vegetation indicated a clean source. Dead or diseased plants and unusual leaf color could indicate chemical contamination of the water. The color of the water was the most important indicator. Clear water was not always safe, but cloudy, discolored, or iridescent water definitely required serious treatment. Water with a metallic sheen was considered particularly dangerous. It could contain heavy metals or petroleum products. The time of year and weather conditions also affected the quality of natural sources. After rains, the water in rivers became cloudy from washed-away soil, but this diluted any possible contamination. During dry periods, the concentration of harmful substances in water bodies increased. British soldiers in Burma learned to recognize signs of contamination by insects. A large number of midges and mosquitoes indicated stagnant water with organic contaminants. The absence of aquatic insects could mean chemical poisoning of the water body. Soldiers tested the water in a simple way. They applied a few drops to a clean metal surface and let it dry. If a white film or colored spots remained after evaporation, this indicated a high content of salts or other impurities. Experienced scouts knew how to determine the suitability of a source by its surroundings. The presence of bones or animal remains near the water was an alarming sign. A healthy body of water is usually surrounded by living nature, not a graveyard. These natural detective skills saved many lives. The ability to read the signs of the environment allowed soldiers to find safe sources of water and avoid deadly traps in the form of poisoned water bodies. Military operations did not always allow time for lengthy water purification procedures. When minutes counted and thirst became unbearable, soldiers used emergency purification methods that could save lives in critical situations. The fastest method was the hot sand method. Clean sand was heated over a fire or in a metal container to a high temperature. Then water was quickly poured into the hot sand, which instantly boiled and was partially disinfected. This method was especially popular with tank crews, who used the hot parts of their vehicles to heat the sand. The hot metal of the tank's hull after battle could serve as a heat source for emergency water disinfection. American Marines developed a method of combat boiling. They used tracer bullets to heat small amounts of water in metal cups. The burning phosphorus in the bullets provided enough heat for rapid boiling. Soviet sappers used gunpowder to instantly heat water. A small amount of gunpowder was ignited under a metal container of water. The explosive combustion provided short-term but very intense heating. German paratroopers used dry alcohol tablets from their kits to heat food. One tablet could bring a glass of water to a boil in 2 to 3 minutes. This was faster and safer than other emergency methods. Partisans often used the stone boiling method. Stones were heated in a fire until red hot, then transferred to a container of water with special tongs or sticks. The hot stone instantly brought the water to a boil. Obtaining clean water was only half the battle. The other half was preserving this precious liquid from recontamination and spoilage. Soldiers quickly realized that improper storage could negate all their purification efforts. The main principle of storage was to completely isolate purified water from the external environment. Flasks and bottles were tightly sealed with corks or caps. Even the slightest contact with air could lead to bacteria entering and recontamination. Metal flasks were considered the ideal storage medium. They did not let in light, which promoted the growth of algae and bacteria. Aluminum flasks were lightweight, while steel ones were more durable and long-lasting. Glass bottles were also good, but their fragility made them impractical in combat conditions. However, glass was the ideal material for stationary storage in dugouts and shelters, as it did not impart any foreign taste to the water. Soldiers learned to sterilize containers before filling them with purified water. Flasks and bottles were rinsed with boiling water or wiped with alcohol. This simple technique prevented contamination of clean water with residues from previous contents. The storage temperature was critically important. In the heat, water in metal containers heated up and became a favorable environment for bacteria to multiply. Soldiers tried to keep their water supplies in the shade and cool. In winter, the main danger was freezing. Ice could break the flask, and when it melted, contaminants could get into the cracks. Therefore, in winter, water was stored under clothing, using body heat to prevent freezing. Soviet soldiers often added a little vodka or moonshine to purified water. Alcohol served as a preservative, preventing the growth of bacteria. This method was especially popular for long-term storage of water in the field. American soldiers used chlorine tablets not only for purification, but also for preserving already purified water. 1 tablet per large flask created a residual chlorine concentration that prevented recontamination. We have examined 10 ways of turning snow, ice, and dirty water into life-giving moisture that were used by soldiers during World War II. Each of these methods, from proper snow melting to chemical disinfection, was born out of necessity and tempered in the crucible of war. These simple but effective technologies saved millions of lives. They prove that knowledge can be a more valuable weapon than a rifle or grenade. In a world where clean water was a luxury, soldiers' ingenuity turned any liquid into a source of life. The history of these methods is a lesson in the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the most inhuman conditions, people found ways to survive and stay healthy. Simple techniques perfected through practice became the difference between life and death. Which of these water purification methods do you think is the most ingenious? Do you think this knowledge could be useful in our time? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel to learn more amazing stories about soldiers' ingenuity.